I'm John Strohmeyer, and this is the 5-Star Counsel Podcast. The market for legal services is shifting, and lawyers who don't adapt will be left behind. This podcast gives you a competitive edge in today's market by sharing the client service lessons you probably didn't learn in law school or in law practice. Let's start the show. Hey 5-Star listeners, before we start, I want to tell you about our amazing sponsor, Smith AI. Smith AI is a virtual receptionist service for small businesses with a specialty in working with solo and small law firms. I signed up with them within weeks of starting my firm because they are affordable for even the smallest solo practice. Their friendly receptionists respond to potential clients in Spanish or English, screen and schedule new leads, and can even take payments. And now they're answering calls 24 hours a day. So even when you're asleep, they're still working. Even beyond the phone, they've got live agents and chatbots ready to capture leads on your website, by text, and by Facebook Messenger. Smith's friendly gatekeepers can staff your front line so you can work uninterrupted. You can finally have the peace of mind that while you're working, you're not missing out on future work. Plans start at just $70 a month for calls and $100 a month for chats. Smith AI is offering a free trial, and our podcast listeners get an extra $100 discount code with promo code 5-STAR. That's FIVESTAR. Sign up and learn more at www.smith.ai. Don't let another day go by. Try Smith AI. Hey, it's John Strohmeyer. We're back with the stream. This week, we are bringing on a special guest, Mike Whelan. Hello.
Can you hear me now? We got to do that thing that happens on every live thing where you're like, let me go play myself on Facebook Live.
To our live streamer, watcher fans, thank you for joining us. This week, Mike and I are going to be talking about expert status. Mike, you wrote the book, Lawyer Forward, Finding Your Place in the Future of Law. Go buy that now. It's fun. Buy a couple copies. What we're doing today, we're going to talk about what I think is the point of your book. There are two choices for lawyers going forward. The harder, but ultimately more valuable path for lawyers is to develop expert status, expertise, gives you a higher price point, higher return on investment for what you're doing. The other is being an audience builder, where you're not so concerned with you having the status as an expert, but you have access to the experts. You can bring together the team. And it's not necessarily an either or, but you're going to be primarily one or the other. I have stepped all over your brilliance. Correct me where I'm wrong.
Yeah, I mean, my background pre-law was in logistics. And so I tend to think of this as like more connected chains in order to serve people. It sounds inefficient and terrible. And yet we have a thriving economy built on the idea that you can buy a doll that came from friggin' China for $10. And Jess Birkin is on here saying, but aren't we already experts? You're a monster, Jess Birkin. But yeah, no, I mean, the argument that I'm sort of making in it is think about collaboration in that way that's more connected. Just for a second, step yourself back and think, I may not have to be everything by myself. And then B, when you do that, when you define the different roles, the two most profitable roles, which is true in supply chains in general, are the irreplaceable people. And one of those irreplaceable people is the point of sale, right? The person with the relationships. And the other is the expert, the person that does something no one else can do, right? So they just do something really rare. In both cases, you create a price premium on irreplaceability, right? Economists talk about the availability of substitutes. When there is an available substitute and it's easy to get to and it's good enough and people can just switch, it just lowers the value. And so those two roles are not the only two roles in the future of law. They just happen to be the most profitable. And so I encourage lawyers to pick one and really discourage them to try to do both at the same time, which is, your business might be able to address both in a networked way, but not you personally. It's really hard to be both.
Right. And that was one of the things I struggled with. And I had to talk to you a few times before it really kind of snapped to you're going to be a mix of both, but you personally, not your law firm, you're going to have to pick one or the other. And that's ultimately what we're going to have to figure out for ourselves.
Yeah, I just remembering every legal conference I've ever gone to, but one specifically stands out that, well, I'll give a couple examples. One, I went to a legal conference where in one session, there were a couple of really smart people up at the top trying to teach people how to use Twitter and LinkedIn for lawyers. And if you want to, and everybody's got their phones out there, and literally the thing stops because in the middle of it, this very old lawyer, this old guy says, wait a second, I'm on the site. Do I push the bird here? And I kid you not, for like 15 minutes, they're talking this guy through signing up for Twitter. And I'm like, bro, you're probably like 70. You don't need to figure out Twitter right now. You don't have to be everywhere all the time. And of course, in the very next session, the ethics people stood up and were like, you should never be on Twitter. Twitter is a disaster for you. And so, just that sort of confusion in the messages that we get from those conferences. And then another one I was at more recently where it was proposed that we should be available by text. Like all the time. We should always be available by text because that's what our clients want. And because our clients said so, we should be there. And then in the very next session, they're talking about, well, you should be real, people are hiring you because you know things that they can't possibly know because you're spending the time getting to know those things. Well, those two things can't both be true. You can't be textable by your clients at all times and still be expected to be in the basement reading books the way John Strohmeyer does. So let me talk about the book real quick while John gets his technology figured out, because he's in a basement somewhere in the middle of nowhere in Arkansas. And so I'll tell you a little bit about the book. The book starts out with me in a courtroom with a lawyer who was very senior to me, and he was really struggling. He was having a hard time with his practice. He was clearly forgetting who his clients were. He was doing all kinds of different practice areas. It was a rural practice, and so he was going to 5 different counties and just running back and forth and trying to cover all these different areas. And as a rural lawyer myself, like that resonated. And I had been told by plenty of people that that was my only choice. That was all I could do. If you're a rural lawyer, you are signing off on being a general practitioner. You're signing off on running all the time. You're signing off on being available by text all the time because you're living in areas that don't have services. So you're like the point of contact for everything for these people's lives to kind of deal with conflict in these people's lives. And I'm running around and he's running around. And I remember going home to my wife and just saying, I can't do this. I don't want to live like that. And the book sort of sets off in a journey where I'm going through different models and thinking through, okay, here's how we're taught to practice. And I talk about the history of it and why we are taught this way. And then let me go through some business basics about how entrepreneurialism works, and especially how entrepreneurialism works today, how it works in the modern economy. And through that, I sort of land on this expertise versus solopreneurship conversation and the discipline that's different for each of them. That entrepreneurship is really built on accessibility. And we need lawyers. We do need lawyers in the legal supply chain who are figuring out how to be accessible, how to get the law to the people, right? It's pretty useless if people are sitting in basements and coming up with these really brilliant ideas, but it's not getting to people. That's not very helpful. And then on the flip side, we can't just be order takers. We're not dry cleaners. In fact, we are selling expertise. We are selling insights. And so that conflict of wanting us to be both accessible and expert, that conflict plays out in lawyers' lives. And for me, I don't talk about this in the book, but what really hit home for me while writing this book was the man that I mentioned at the beginning of the book. While I was writing this book, he committed suicide. It was right after Hurricane Harvey, and he just lost everything because he had no margin. He didn't have financial margin. He had no emotional margin. He just was running. He was so used to what I call the churn. The capital C churn is the bad guy of the book. He was so used to that he just couldn't do it. And he gave up. And I don't want to trivialize his suicide. I'm sure there was a lot of stuff going on that goes well beyond a business model, but it's reflective to me that the people bearing the burden of that conflict most of the time is us, right? We're told to be both of these roles. We're supposed to know how to do both of these things at the same time, but accessibility and expertise are not compatible. You literally cannot do both deep reading and text availability all the time at the same time. So in Saving Your Butt, I explained the beginning of the book and talked about the difference between expertise and accessibility as a focus. And you wanted to talk more about the expert path, which I do want to say is not a better path. I don't want a prescriptive sort of feeling about this. If you want to go build the scaled empire and you want to have a pyramid of and you're thinking about cost and you want to do that work and you want to learn how SEO works and copywriting and all that, like, go with God. It's great. Frankly, that's what my business is. I am less an expert than I am an audience builder. And so like, I see you, I'm with you. But if you're the kind of person who wants to build on expertise, John.
Look, I'm living the expert dream. And earlier Earlier today, I was talking with one of the enrolled agents I work with on some high-level international tax issues. She gets referrals from her competitors, which I think is a hallmark of being an expert. When your competitors, the people who could go somewhere, who could take business from you, send things they don't want to deal with, and not just the throw-off cases of, oh, this one's going to be a bear. I'm going to send it over to, I'm going to send it over to Randy because I don't like him that much, and this will be terrible for him. That'll show him.
Right. If you're getting referrals from other lawyers and all those cases are awful, it's not because people like you, just so you know.
No. And
they don't.
I don't like doing that. And we're not here to do that. We're here about how can we get it to where we're the ones who are getting those referrals. We're the ones doing that. And so, just as a quick refresher, I'm going to throw this. We're going to run through some quick slides. The background, the thoughts that I have on all of this. Well, look, service, my main point, it's how easily a business delivers its physical and technical product. We don't want to focus on those red herring products. Mike, the ball pit that you and I have talked about at McDonald's so many times, that is not what McDonald's sells. McDonald's sells hamburgers and other caloric dense foods. They just offer, as part of their sales process, the ball pit to lure you in because your kids will be quiet for half an hour, or they'll be loud somewhere out of earshot. And ultimately,
which does have value. That is pretty great because I don't like my kids very much, but that doesn't mean that's what they sell.
No, people are coming for things other than they're forcing you to buy the hamburger, but the ball pit is luring you in. It's an incentive, an enticement, a little something to get you in the door. Ultimately and long-term, service is going to be a combination of high-tech automations and high-touch humans. You don't want to rely on one or the other. You need the human expert dealing with the expert machines to make, identify some options, rule out some others. But you're never going to do better than having them work together. Otherwise, we're all screwed. And mentioning that I was talking with one of the EAs I work with, she built her own service, her own technical product. She's got a software product that produces returns, and it is going to be it's something that she licenses out to other law firms, other CPAs, that just takes the work off of their hands. So when we think about this, her business, she's selling a product, her clients are receiving an experience. Things we've gone through before, the business is doing marketing, sales, and selling a product is three kind of main tasks. Ultimately, that product we care about has the physical, technical, and service components. My friend, the EA, has taken her expertise and condensed it into a product that she can sell. And now that's a commodity in some senses. She's the only one out there, but other people are probably going to see, oh, she's making some money. What if I do it as well? Have my form building machine that I can sell to people. So long-term, she can't sit on just her one product. She's going to need to keep building her expertise in this area and keep on going. But Mike, how does she build more expertise? How does she get those more skills? How does, you and I have gone back and forth on what I've called and adapted from sabermetrics from baseball of the value over the replacement attorney, where we think of our value as being, we want to maximize that when we're an expert. The replacement lawyer is brought in at low cost and can do, I think what some of us have called the tour guide to law. They can just get an average result for a low cost. When you're an expert, you're putting a lot of distance between your value as the attorney and that replacement level attorney. Because when we've got that expert status, we're not worried about Google. We're not worried about clients going to LegalZoom. We're not really worried about the DIY or replacement options. But we do need to think about them because they're coming to get us in some sense. They're all trying to be better. Google wants to just, sell us ads by having answers. And that's where they're making their money. LegalZoom wants to just be there to get those documents. And if you're on the Thunberg model, LegalZoom is a threat. But on the expert status model, we're not worried about that. Why?
Well, it's all about known substitutes, right? If there's a known substitute that is good enough, then your value just goes down. That's just the way it is. So, a lot of lawyers will say, well, LegalZoom will screw it up, and then they come to me and I get to charge out the nose to fix all the stuff that they broke. But that's not like an ad for you. That's not a good feeling, because the reason that they chose LegalZoom in the first place was not because they're a perfect substitute, but because they are a viable substitute. There were some level of substitute there that was okay for people who were familiar with that substitute. And so for you, as you're, making your expertise pitch, it's not simply about being an expert, which is one conversation, right? We should talk about how one becomes an expert, but it's also about being a known expert. It's also about, because that's the only way you are a known substitute for something that's less, right? People have to be able to connect that expertise. And so if you're, sort of hidden in a basement, again, you may be the brightest star in the sky, but nobody knows, right? So they're not making that economic choice as to substitute. So I think what we're going to talk about a bit today is how you do that. How do you become a known expert?
Exactly. You took the words out of my mouth, because I was going to say, what if you're you're the greatest expert, but stuck in the basement? Who cares? You haven't helped anybody. Right. Because our job is to help clients move whatever needle it is. And if we're just stuck in the basement and we're not helping anybody, who cares? Doesn't matter. And, jumping back to, when you're just starting out, your value and your price premium is low. But once you start developing, and, the numbers are made up, it doesn't really matter. But kind of the way I think about it is, you're going to accelerate your price premium or your return on that expert investment as you grow through your business, so that you're getting a higher price premium once you can set yourself apart. And this is one of the benefits of being in that expert status. The audience building entrepreneur is not as worried about that. They're looking for efficiencies and, at scale from having all of those clients. And so, when we start moving into how do we deal with this, again, we're thinking about that technical component, the knowledge, the kind of base rules that we think about. This is what you need just to enter the game. The skills are the next level of how do you do something. You can, you know how to file that motion for summary judgment, you know how to write a will, but you don't necessarily know the ins and outs. And so once we get to expert level, we're not worried about every problem being a nail. We're expanding our expertise and our level and number of solutions. And kind of the hallmarks of this are, you're bringing accountability to your clients for what you've done. You can pick among multiple courses of action. Again, it's not every problem is a nail. It's, I've got a nail and we can use my hammer. Or if you're looking for a hole in the wall, we've got the drill, or we've got the screwdriver, thinking down the line, what are we possibly going to need? What else could be going on? So, Mike, when we think about that, anything else to add on what expert looks like?
Yeah, I think you and I talked about this a little bit. I was listening to a marketplace podcast, and they were talking about a term that they called the Secretary of the Future. That's a Vonnegut reference, and a lot of these companies are hiring these chief sustainability officers. And the function of the chief sustainability officer, which is starting to become a thing in big firms, the function of that person is to see the bigger picture, to see the longer term, to think in bigger terms. And when I think about those three stages that you just defined of knowledge and skills and expertise, it reminds me of something that was said in that podcast. And this guy said something so smart. He said, every business goes through three phases. You've got the compliance phase, you've got the efficiency phase, and then you've got the innovation phase. And what he meant by that was, at first, you're just doing what you have to do in the business, right? That's that knowledge piece that you're talking about. Just to be in the marketplace and not get sued, you have a pretty basic, amount of understanding that you need to go get. And he said, and this is so true in law, that almost all businesses stop at that point. Almost all businesses, they do the bare minimum that they have to do, and they figure out a bunch of them, the really smart ones, will go to the next phase, which is efficiency. Now we're going to do those base things, but faster, more effectively, more quality control. We're going to do it more. But he said what most businesses don't do is that innovation thing. They don't get to the point where they start really questioning fundamentals, really coming up with insights that no one else has done. And that's where most of the leverage comes in this expertise model, is getting to that point where it's like, I've done the work that no one else will do. There are other people in the industry. When you get to the point that if you're building on expertise, that you're the known expert and people come to you because you know crazy things no one else knows, and you've thought through things and you can come up with new ideas. Like, that's fundamental to this. It's not just that you have, freaking Google exists. There's no amount of knowledge that you can have that will top the knowledge in the network, right? It's not about having exclusive knowledge anymore. It's about, do you have a process for coming up with new ideas to answer new problems? That's expertise. That is It's rare. And the problem is both of these models, whether it's audience building or expertise, the known value lags behind the value offered, right? You do a lot of work first before people get it, whether it's because you were out building community and you're trying to talk to a bunch of people, or because you went and became the super nerd. Both in terms of perceived value, it lags your actual value. It lags the work you did. And so a lot of lawyers just won't invest that time. They just won't do that work.
And Mike, I want to pull something out of what you said, because you keyed off of the expert status gives you leverage. And what I see a lot of people doing in service is they're following these articles of, well, I saw Disney do this, or the Joshi story from the Ritz-Carlton, or Zappos spent 10 hours on a phone call with somebody. And these are held up as, this is the service that lawyers need to be bringing. The problem is Disney and Ritz and Four Seasons and Zappos have way more leverage than the average law firm. And what I want people thinking about is there's a time and a place for that level of expenditure, but that's a high risk, high return investment that you can't get at if you're the solopreneur who is right out there, like you literally just opened your firm and it's just you don't have that leverage. You need to be focused on figuring out where you can get the small wins that are going to build on themselves. The spending 10 hours on the phone with somebody, you just don't have that free capital. And this spills over into a lot of the other things that aren't service related, but get thrown at lawyers in the mindset of, well, unfortunately, we're really good at throwing money away and not knowing what we're doing. I mean, I'm certainly guilty of this. I spent money on some expensive gifts for a potential client, and they went and hired somebody else. What was I doing? I should not have been buying any sort of gifts for clients that were more than, really anything, because they weren't hiring me as their outsourced procurement agent. They were hiring me potentially. They didn't hire me to do anything.
Yeah.
But, when we start thinking down the lines of, oh, well, I saw this lawyer, they're spending money on PPC. It's fine to do that, but you need to not, it's not a good game for us to be getting in if we don't know why people are hiring us. One of our friends, Greg Steele, mentioned that I think he was getting targeted in South Carolina with ads for some attorney in New York. And there's just no reasonable connection. But this attorney probably thought, oh, well, my cost per view or whatever metric, it's super low, but it's a useless waste of time because that attorney is getting views all over the country and none of them are going to turn into dollars. And so before we start thinking about how can I spend money on like these high investment $5,000 a month on PPC or Facebook ads, until you know why people are coming to you, it's throwing money away. It's having the marketing branding strategy. It's like, no, your branding strategy, until you're the expert, needs to be, I'm really good at doing this, not let me set up the extra Instagram account for the pets in my office. That's a fun diversion to let people know who you are, but until they know why they hire you, that's a distraction from the real job of get clients in the door and take care of them.
Yeah, and I think I want to nail home something that you taught me, which is how to do my hair in the morning. That wasn't the thing. It was, this idea that you can't distract away from your fundamentals. Meaning, let's say that you're McDonald's and you want, this is why John and I talk about this ball pit thing all the time. When McDonald's goes and puts in the ball pit, it doesn't create a price premium for their burgers. They can only charge the same amount that Wendy's does, right? It doesn't create a competitive advantage. It's a thing that they've decided to do. And that's because their fundamental offering is a burger. That's what people are there for. And so the ball pit is nice to have, but it's not going to change buying decisions. And what John, what you really pointed out to me was, for lawyers, ours is a technical product. We are delivering something. Our accoutrement, our like side things that we do, can't outpace the development of our expertise. People are there to hire a certain kind of lawyer. Again, if this is what your firm does, people are there to hire you for a technical product. For you to go add a ball pit and emailing all the time and being available by text, all these things could in fact take up energy that distracts from the fact that you could get more leverage out of developing your expertise, right? So all of these tips, that is all to say, I recently did a 90-day known expert series on the Lawyer Forward podcast. You guys go listen to it, but I called out John in that because the advice that you get out in the world, you read books about, like you mentioned, Disney and what's the shoe company, Zappos and all these, and even the Four Seasons. There's all kinds of little tips that you can get, and you start to feel pressure. You start to feel like, boy, I really should have a ball pit in my office. But if you're not doing the fundamentals, the buyer doesn't care.
Right. It starts with every business has a primary component. You're a physical component business. McDonald's is a physical component business. You go there for the burgers. And yes, they have technical components and the service that goes along with it. But at the end of the day, you want the thing, and that thing is the burger. You go to the lawyer because you want the technical service. You want to have a problem solved. The same reason you go to a doctor. I need somebody solve this problem. Or CPA, I have a problem. It's called I haven't filed my tax returns. Help me with that. Then we get over into the service component business. And this is where people get confused, and rightfully so. It took me a while to figure this out. The difference is when I'm calling a service component business, these are the businesses that if you had a free Saturday, you would go to that business and give them your money. And it doesn't matter how good we do as lawyers or doctors or CPAs or engineers. Nobody's going to say, oh, I've got a free Saturday and some money burning a hole in my pocket. I'm going down to the lawyer's office. It's not going to work that way. And if you try and switch over and say, I'm going to try and mimic and just jam every bit of dollars into experience, you're competing in a place where you're going to get just trampled. Like Disney's experience, Four Seasons experience, Zappos experience, they're in this all day long, and they're going to just crush you on experience in a way that it's just not feasible. I mean, it's a concept I've talked about before of the red herring products of things you're doing, things you're selling to clients that they aren't necessarily asking for from you. And so this is the idea of, well, we have the drink menu that we offer to our clients. Well, clients aren't coming to you for a drink menu. Kind of the next stage in that war of escalation is going to be the omelet menu that you offer to clients in the morning. You should come to our law firm because we have an omelet menu. No, don't do that. Like, stop offering drink menus. At the Four Seasons, if we didn't have it in stock, we didn't run out and buy it. Why? That was inefficient. Same with these over-the-top services. Like, people don't want you to offer massages when you're in their law office. Sure, they'd like it, but you going out and learning the skills and having that, it just doesn't make any sense.
I think there's an ethics rule against that.
Yeah, probably that too.
Don't put your hands on your clients. But let's put this into context, because I think that the problem with any kind of absolute, there are a couple of factors that John and I have talked about several times. And one is what your model is. That's a bit what we're getting into now. And two is where you are in the history of your business, right? Because we don't want to give you prescriptive, this is right, this is wrong, because those two factors really play into it. It might be wrong for your model, which is different than this is wrong, right? And it might be wrong for where you are in your business. So a thing that John and I talked about that really helped me visualize this was sort of a bell curve if the X is time, right? Because early you're going to do little tweaks. You're going to hear about little service things you should do and little changes you should make in your firm. And then in the middle, really, you're going to spend most of that time developing your brain, right? If you're an expertise-focused business, there's going to be a good chunk of time spent on that high leverage, high impact work. That's why it's a bell curve, is that middle stuff is really going to change the perceived value of your firm because you're doing that high leverage work. And then at the end, you're, again, down to little tweaks that sort of change the value. So for me, what helped in my conversation with you, John, was to think about, all right, let's say I went to a conference. I got a piece of advice. Let's take two pieces of advice. You should have really good coffee, and you should have an assistant who is answering your emails, right? Both of them are service-oriented activities. They both make the experience better for the client. So the question is, we know that these are little tweaks. We know that these are not high leverage changes. We know that this does not make, neither of those makes people think that I'm a super expert that they should pay for because there's no substitute. But the question is that an enabling tweak? Or is that a cleanup tweak? Is that an early stage or a late stage change? So you think about the coffee. If you change that coffee in your early stage, if you decide that's the low early end of the bell curve, You're going to change your coffee. It doesn't enable you to become an expert. It doesn't enable you to make the kinds of change. That's a late stage tweak, right? Add that at the end, by all means. If you got to the point that you're a known expert and people want to pay you out the nose because you're you, have the best freaking coffee from Colombia that you can find that you shipped in and got pulled over by customs. I don't know what happens with coffee, but great. Go do that thing. The assistant answering your emails. Now think about where that puts you in terms of leverage. That's an early stage tweak, because as soon as that happens, you're spending more expert time. You're doing more of the higher leverage, high impact work. So when John and I say, don't do these red herring things, don't try to distract clients from the fact that your expertise is not there. What you then have to do is make that extra effort to say, well, that feels like a should, right? I should do this thing, but should I now? Right? A, is it right for my model? And B, is this the time for it? That when you and I talked about that, John, that helped me. Like, that opened up a big realization for me.
Right. And to put it a different way, between the assistant for email and the better coffee, which one helps you deliver your technical product to your clients? The coffee doesn't move any needles for your clients. It doesn't mean that they don't have a better experience. It just means if you hired them to adopt a child, the type of coffee that they got doesn't change the adoptive status of that child. But your emails getting responded to faster, getting information quicker from the client, that's going to help the client get that child adopted faster. And that's the thing. It's just we're putting the pieces in order so that you're building out your firm and your practice in a way that makes sense. You're going to do the low-cost things first. I was on Max Lawyer's Facebook group earlier this week, and somebody was talking about, who do I hire first, the associate attorney or the paralegal? And again, you've got, going back, I started with the paralegal, but I probably should have started first with the assistant to help manage the super low-level tasks. And it's not that they're not important, but this is why I got Smith AI involved so early. They're taking care of just a crucial task, answer the phones, and they're doing it for me, but it's just the low ROI task that it just has to be done. And you get those squared away first. You get the certain, like, the ROI is infinite for your business, because if you don't have working email, if you don't have a working, back end and an ability to work, you can't do anything. Answering the phones, you better have a phone line to get that done. So, Mike, we've done what we always do. We get distracted and we start ranting and raving. Nominally, we invited people here to talk about developing expert status. Sure. So you did just run through all of this on your 90-day known expert series. I listened to everyone first thing in the morning. It was a great series. I've started several of them to repeat in the future. Well, we've got 15 minutes left. So instead of 90 days times 10 minutes, you've got, now we'll call it 10 minutes.
Well, I'll say this. What ended up being core to developing expertise surprised me. When I started the series, I really thought it'd be a bunch of big ideas. I really thought it ended up being a writing class. And the reason that is going to annoy lawyers who are watching this, and I really don't care, is the secret to developing expertise is writing. And when you decide that you're going to be an expert, especially a known expert, again, can't be in a basement just reading books and yay for you. You got to be able to solve problems for people. Writing is a huge part of that, because it develops ideas. It makes you see patterns in a way that no other activity does. For me, I lead with podcasts. I tend to go podcast first to develop ideas and then write. It doesn't matter. Whatever your particular writing process is, reducing something to writing just makes you think differently. And then third, it makes you known, right? The act of publishing, the act of putting your ideas out there turns that into known expertise. And so we can talk about that, but the foundation of this activity of becoming a known expert is writing, is improving your writing, is using that as a vehicle to develop known expertise.
That is so interesting, because it's not an idea that you and I haven't talked about before. It's definitely a concept of the expert writes. That comes up again and again in Blair N's work in Win Without Pitching. I'm pretty sure David C. Baker, his podcast companion, gets on that as well. But what you're doing is, that's the best marketing. When you go out and you're effectively giving away your answers, what you're doing is you're showing people you know what to do. And, people don't want to sign up for advertising streams. I mean, on Instagram, and I remember even years ago, I was following one hashtag related to estate planning, and one attorney was just in there all the time hammering away on just hire me, hire me, hire me. I didn't want to touch that hashtag because nobody was in there. That attorney was all alone, just hammering away, thinking that this was somehow going to work, but not telling people what to do. And when you go look at some of the better marketing firms, there is one group called The Future. They spell it Futur. Just brilliant people. They've got content everywhere. And one of the interesting things to think about is this is a marketing firm that has a huge Instagram following, a huge YouTube following, because they're just giving away everything. They're taking you inside their classes where they're teaching other creative professionals. This is how we do what we do. This is what you should be thinking about. Guess what? You can see that they know what they're talking about. And so while their writing isn't always white papers, they've expanded writing to let's put together Instagram carousels explaining how to do things. I mean, there's one that I've got starred for easy finding for me where they explain this is how you set up an Instagram carol of 10 posts to actually move people to do something. I mean, that's great. Guess what? If I ever have the budget to hire them, why would I go anywhere else?
Well, and to think about it properly, like what you just described is indicative of the shift in value in the Google era, right? Time was lawyers were hired because they had knowledge that other people didn't. It was a specialization play. It was, when we decided to have farmers and everybody started dividing up jobs, it was the chunk of knowledge idea. It was that, hey, you're going to own this chunk of knowledge, you own this chunk, and we'll pay each other to share each other's chunks of knowledge. It was this early specialization play. But now we're in a world, there's a really good book by David Weinberger called Too Big to Know, that it's just too big to know that the network, in fact, will always know more than we do. It's not chunks of knowledge anymore. Even the chunk of knowledge relevant to what you do, John, is too big for it to all be held in your head. It's the networks are too complex. And so when you are making an expert play, you're not selling monopolized knowledge. You're selling a thinking process. And here is where I lose people, because we've spent so many years railing against the idea that we go to law school to think like a lawyer. But that's exactly what you need to demonstrate, right? You need to demonstrate your pattern of thinking, how you take patterns and pull insights from them and share them in a way that solves new problems, novel problems, right? That's not precedence thinking, right? That's pattern thinking. It's patterns to insights to solutions. And so in your writing, what you're doing is not necessarily giving away the farm. You're demonstrating, right? You're giving away the knowledge that you have, but that's not what people are hiring you anyway. They could just go do a Google search and get it. What they need to see from your writing, from your content, from your demonstration is that you know how to think about their problem in a way that other people don't know. Because your principal function now as a modern expert is you enable people to make decisions. That's it. There's no grand strategy anymore. As much as I love John Lewis Gaddis's book, that just doesn't function in a world of machine learning. You can't tie everything to logic anymore. Grand strategy doesn't really work. The world's complex. You got to be able to pivot. So what you're demonstrating to people is, I know how to take a new, unknown, unforeseen problem. I can apply what is known and through my pattern matching, through insight development, I can create solutions that no one else has thought of before. That's expertise. That's what they need to see from you. And that's why writing is so crucial, because you're doing that exact pattern.
Right. And as a lawyer, we get nervous of, well, I'm going to recognize this pattern, I'm going to analyze it, and somebody's going to take it, it's going to blow up in their face, and they're going to sue me for malpractice. But the key is look, you get to set the pattern and say, here are the things that I saw in this pattern. And It's easy because you get to make up the pattern. And then you analyze that pattern and say, all right, well, given factors 1, 2, and 3, I would recommend that we do this, this, and this so that the client gets this. And what you're getting is you're developing your expert status because you get to throw out your solutions. Who knows, you may get somebody who leaves a comment or a suggestion and you add that to your tool bag, but you're going through the work that an expert does. Recognize that pattern, say, this is what you should do. This is what I have learned. This is what you're doing. And you're not worried about giving it away because, sure, I can sit here and just rattle off, oh, well, we could think about these 15 different types of trust that might have an option for you. And frankly, I was doing this morning with that enrolled agent. We were on a Zoom call for an hour and a half talking about two potential clients. One, we spent half an hour and ultimately realized there's no value I can really bring to this client right now until the laws change. I had a half-hour conversation that I can't monetize directly. But going back to the client and saying, or potential client, for right now, you don't need me. Stick with your enrolled agent. This is when you call me back and then you start paying me. And that was the first half hour. The second half hour was working through with the same EA, a different client who has radically different circumstances. And it took us an hour to come up with the two of us chiming in with ideas, working together on one particular fact pattern. And that's, developing our expert status. I heard a few ideas that I hadn't heard before. And it wasn't because they were somehow closed off to me. I'm a tax attorney. She's an enrolled agent. I mean, sure, there's differences in our level of, the certifications, but we were both experts who've done this sort of work, and we could come together, put our heads together, learn something from each other, get a little bit more expert, stay ahead of the Google Legal Zoom consortium.
Well, and what an interesting thing you just pointed out, which is that experts can be wrong and still serve their social function. And that is really hard for lawyers who are in a legislated industry. Something that I've noticed with state bars is that competent counsel, the requirement of competence, does not tie directly to being right or wrong. It's, did you use the appropriate method based on the information that you had in front of you? And so I think while lawyers are really antsy about the modern expert, again, their function is to help people make decisions, knowing that those decisions might be wrong. Because the thing that actually holds people up, as an aside, you pointed out a podcast to me where this guy who was dean of the business school at Toronto, he was asked, what's the error businesses do when they're thinking the most? And he said, not making a decision, which surprised the interviewer because he was like, no, I thought you were going to say like they make stupid decisions. And he's like, no, it's not choosing something. That in fact, for the majority of your clients, it's not that they need to be right. It's that they need movement. And in an increasingly complex world, nobody expects you to be right all the time. What they expect you to do is to be able to give them some counsel. And if you feel like you have to qualify that in some way by giving them just some ammo, and let them go make the call, that's fine. But your method is more important to that process than your substantive knowledge. So by all means, develop your substantive knowledge, but through your writing, work the muscle of your method because that's what people hire you for.
Mike, look at that. Landing the plane right on time. It's almost like you looked at the clock and said, we only have a few minutes left. Mike, thank you so much for being here. Hopefully the next time we do something like this, I have better internet connectivity.
It's 2020,
It is what it is. Mike, where can the people find you?
I think right now, if this is a subject that interests you, go to the Lawyer Forward podcast. It's on abovethelaw.com/lawyerforward. And that 90-day known expert series is there. I'm also going to be turning it into a book soon, but it's literally 90 days of activities that you can follow beginning to end, things to do every day to become a known expert. So go find the 90-day known expert. You can also buy the book Lawyer Forward on Amazon.
Excellent. Mike, and while you were saying that, I looked it up. The Knowledge Project podcast with Shane Parrish, one of the more recent episodes. I don't know who it was, but professor of management at Toronto University. Everybody, thanks for sticking with us. We will be back, not next week, but the first week of January. We'll figure out what the topic is then. Thanks so much. Thanks so much for listening. You can find more info on us and get your free white paper on client service at 5starcounsel.com. You can get in touch with me at john@5starcounsel.com. If you enjoyed the podcast, please subscribe wherever fine podcasts are found and leave us a review wherever you can.